We're going on assignment with the Voice of America. How has it been like covering the event?
And I have a list right here in front of me of all the journalists who were beaten.
I make the call because I'm on the ground.
The Chechen.
Gabe Joslow, VOA News, Mogadishu.
Welcome again to On Assignment, VOA's weekly look at the stories behind the headlines and the reporters who cover them. I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. This week, questions and criticism following the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
A new report tells us how the Earth supports life.
Religious freedom advocates take on the U.S. healthcare law in a battle before the Supreme Court.
And young Israelis and Palestinians create their own peace through music.
You're coming with us on assignment. Let's go. The Malaysian government is facing criticism for its handling of the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The plane and its 239 passengers and crew members vanished on March 8th. Satellite data calculations indicate the plane likely crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, but that conclusion took officials more than 2 weeks to reach, a harrowing wait for those involved in the search and the families of the victims.
And joining us right now is VOA's Callan Pursuti. Thank you so much for joining us. You've interviewed so many experts and pilots, and there was such a massive search for this plane, and yet it was undetectable. What do you think happened?
Well, I think a lot of people are asking, how could it have disappeared? I mean, it's a massive plane, as you say, and in an era when we can locate, I mean, just our cell phones. You know, we can locate this, find my phone, it has GPS, I can locate it anywhere around the area, but yet we can't find a 777 plane. Well, the reason for that is because it was over the ocean, over water. We don't really have the capability to locate this plane. Once its 6 radios are turned off and someone decides we aren't going to have any communications, then you can't find the plane.
Now, as you reported, Carolyn, 2/3 of the passengers on this plane were Chinese. How has China responded to this?
China is very upset, as are the Chinese passengers, as you mentioned. But the Chinese government is coming after the Malaysian government, saying that it was chaos. When they first came out, they really didn't know how to handle this investigation. And they've gone so far to say that Malaysia wants to be a developed country by 2020. Well, it's going to take a lot longer than that if we look at the handling of this crisis. And in addition to that, it could have economic impacts, too, on Malaysia. Malaysia gets 1.8 million Chinese tourists a year. And now the Chinese tourists say they are boycotting Malaysia.
What about the links? I mean, people have been saying that there could be some terrorism links to this, or it could help terrorists in the future to hijack planes in this kind of situation. What do you have on that?
Well, you would think that with all this information that we've given out, I mean, we live in a 24/7 news cycle. So there's all this information about a 777, the different transponders that are on it, the various radios. You know, we've given out so much information, but the terrorism experts I talk to say, don't worry about the professional groups. They're sophisticated. They already know about our planes. They already know about our security lapses. They said they can pick up a pilot's manual. They can find out online. But what we really worry about, they say, is the individual terrorist, the individual malcontent that just decides that he or she is angry and they're going to do something about this. And they're the ones that are picking up the information, picking up the tips in this investigation.
What do you think about all the theories that went around? I mean, there were so many things that people were saying. Maybe it was terrorism, like you mentioned. Maybe it was the pilot, and there were so many things back and forth. How does that affect an investigation like this when you have this kind of media frenzy?
Well, it's all speculation, as you know, because we really don't know. And until we find that transponder, we really won't know what happened in the cockpit, what happened in the passenger seats. We don't know if it's plane malfunction. We don't know if it's someone who wanted to take the plane down. But I can tell you that the investigators that I spoke to say, we don't pay any attention to that. We don't share our sources. We don't share our information. We keep it very close until we look at all the facts and we come up with an answer. And we will find out eventually.
How much of an impact would airline security have after this event?
Oh, huge. Oh, I definitely think so. We're going to see changes on the plane itself. What about a transponder that can't be turned off? No one can ever turn it off, and it continues to ping beyond those 30 days. I can see that happening. I can see a difference in the radios that you can't turn off. And what about the security for the passports? You know, there were 2 passengers that boarded with stolen passports. I think a lot more countries will be using that database from Interpol to check their passports, to make sure the right people are on the plane carrying the right passport. But, you know, when we're talking about changes, mechanical changes to the plane, you have to remember that anything you add to the plane adds weight. That correlates to the amount of fuel you have to carry, which correlates to the cost for the airline.
Exactly. And the cost is a big issue. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for your reporting. We really appreciate your insights. Again, VOA's Carolyn Presutti with VOA TV. It is time now for a break. When we come back, uncovering the mystery of life on Earth. You are watching On Assignment.
Scientists have a new theory to explain why Earth has remained a lone outpost for life in our solar system. Earth has stayed livable despite natural events that robbed neighboring planets of the ability to host and sustain life.
Now, researchers say that's because of the geologic cycles Earth has gone through for millions of years and is still going through. On Assignment's Philip Alexio talked with VOA science blogger Rick Panaleo for more. Check it out.
What's the most revealing part about this report?
Well, I think to me the most revealing part of it is how amazing natural geologic cycles control the climate of the Earth by the absorption and release of carbon dioxide. And it's been doing it for millions of years. And in this particular study, what they wound up finding was that the rocks that are the result of the uplifting of the mountains, such as the Andes Mountains and the Himalayas and so forth, throws off a lot of rocks and minerals as the mountains are emerging. And these rocks absorb carbon dioxide. The opposite of what would happen is if the carbon dioxide, all the carbon dioxide was taken away, there would be no greenhouse effect.
And we'd all freeze to death.
And we would all freeze to death. We'd be as cold as Mars. Except Mars doesn't have an atmosphere and we do. But we would be cold. So at the same time that it absorbs carbon dioxide, according to the study, these rocks also slowly release carbon dioxide back into the air. It's stored carbon dioxide. It releases slowly. But this has been going on for millions of years. The scientists then wanted to find out if it was unique, because they were in the Andes Mountains area. They wanted to find out if it was unique to just the Andes Mountains area they were studying. So they did check data from other areas such as the Himalayas and found that this phenomena is global in aspect. And they also wanted to check other records too, so they checked marine records of ocean rocks that date back millions of years. And keep in mind, if we didn't have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, no greenhouse effect, and no life on Earth.
Now, what happens, for example, and I don't know if it's related to this report, when, say, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupts and spews ash and plume around the Earth, and scientists from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, they say that it basically, that event cooled the Earth for a while. Is there any relation to that sort of event compared to what this report says?
I would say no, because what you're talking about with the release of volcanic ash, and of course volcanic ash could be so fine, but what it does, it sort of creates a sunscreen in the atmosphere of fine ash. And what happens is sun is filtered out. And when you're filtering sunlight, you're not getting the full effect of the sun. One of the things I asked Mark Torres, who was one of the, matter of fact, the lead author of the study, I asked him, I said, you know, would these natural processes play with man-made carbon dioxide, such as what we're experiencing now with the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? And the way he told me is, yeah, but it's going to take a long time since the rocks and the natural processes takes a different timetable altogether. It'll take millions of years, but we won't know if it'll fully counteract the carbon dioxide that we're putting out.
But right now it's balanced.
Well, it depends on what side of the argument you are on climate change. But right now it seems as though carbon dioxide, according to a lot of studies, is a great amount accumulating in the atmosphere.
Our thanks to VOA Science blogger Rick Panaleo.
All right, it's time for another break. Coming up, the push for religious freedoms collides with healthcare reform. You're watching On Assignment.
U.S. President Barack Obama's signature healthcare law, the Affordable Care Act, aims to offer health insurance to all Americans, regardless of age or pre-existing conditions. And although the Supreme Court has already ruled that mandating health insurance is constitutional, the law is facing the justices once again.
It is, and the case centers on the new requirement that health plans cover contraceptives. VOA religion reporter Jerome Sokolovsky has been tracking the case, and he explains it to our Rebecca Ward.
As part of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, part of President Obama's health care reform, employers are still providing health care as they did before, but part of that reform includes now contraceptive coverage.
And the reason that Hobby Lobby is one of the companies, Hobby Lobby and Conestoga, have taken the position that this is an affront to their religious liberties.
Right. Hobby Lobby, it's a chain of arts and crafts stores that's owned by an evangelical Christian family. It's actually one of the biggest companies in the country.
This is an issue of life that we cannot be a part of taking life. And so to be in a situation where our government is telling us that we have to be is incredible.
The Supreme Court will have to consider two tricky legal questions. One is whether for-profit corporations have a right to religious freedom, and the other is whether business owners' rights come before those of their employees.
Conestoga Wood Specialties is a smaller company in Pennsylvania. It's a woodworking company. They make cabinets and furniture. And they are owned by a Mennonite family, which is a traditional Protestant grouping. And they are also objecting on the same grounds that it would make them complicit in an abortion.
And I guess one of the questions is whether or not a corporation has the same religious liberty or religious freedom that is guaranteed in our Constitution as a person would.
Right. So there was a controversial Supreme Court ruling a couple of years ago called Citizens United, which found that corporations have the same freedom of speech rights that people have, and therefore corporations could give unlimited amounts of money to electoral campaigns. So some people are looking at perhaps the same thing coming out of this ruling, a ruling that says corporations have the same freedom of religion rights that people do. It's not clear that the Supreme Court's going to go that far, because that could really open up a can of worms. But the Supreme Court is also being asked to rule on whether the burden of religious exercise, the burden on these companies of having their health plans cover these contraceptives, would be more than that of the burden on the employees.
Is there a similar freedom of religion case in the past before the Supreme Court, that came before the Supreme Court?
Well, there have been freedom of religion cases all throughout American history, and certainly recently there was a case in the 90s which was about a Native American being able to smoke a drug,
peyote,
peyote that's technically not legal, and in that case that led to actually what's called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which says that if a person's religious rights are going to be limited, it can only be if there's a compelling interest for the government. So that case is probably going to figure in this Supreme Court case. And there has been a compromise with some other organizations, with religious organizations, that people can get the contraceptive coverage outside of the employer's health care.
So, Jerome, I guess the bottom line is what happens if they rule one way or the other? I mean, how will that affect what's commonly called Obamacare now?
Well, it's interesting that both sides are talking about a kind of Pandora's box of possibilities. If the court rules in favor of Hobby Lobby, more progressive type experts are saying that that could open up to discrimination, like a conservative Muslim taxi driver could refuse to pick up women who are traveling unaccompanied by men because that would be against their faith. Whereas I talked to someone who is one of Hobby Lobby's lawyers who said that if the court rules against Hobby Lobby, that could open up to restrictions on religious freedom, and she cited the bans on kosher and halal ritual slaughter in Europe that we've seen recently. They argued it, saying that animals should be stunned first before they are slaughtered, which is against both the Jewish and Islamic practice.
And thanks again to VOA religion reporter Jerome Sokolovsky for that report. The Supreme Court is expected to make a ruling on this case later this year.
Now, switching gears, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been busy trying to jumpstart Middle East peace talks, but a group of young Israeli and Palestinian musicians known as Heartbeat is already building trust and unity through music.
Yeah, and I actually had the chance to sit down with VOA's Julie Tabo, who caught up with the Jerusalem-based social movement as it wrapped up its American tour. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of Julie's report to start.
Since 2007, Heartbeat has been bringing Palestinian and Israeli high school students and young adults together to talk, listen, and make music. The songs they write weave traditional and modern Eastern and Western styles.
Okay, Julie, so we want to talk to you today about this group that you profiled. Tell us about Heartbeat.
Well, Heartbeat is a very inspiring program. It's basically made up of Israeli and Palestinian youth musicians. They're based in Israel. And the whole idea of the group is to come together and use the universal language of music to build awareness and to help one another understand each other's culture, each other's language, with the understanding and the hope that they can bring down these barriers between Jews and Arabs.
You did this report on the group when they came to Washington. What brought them here?
Well, they were on tour, and they culminated the tour in Washington because they are part of an initiative with the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace. They want to introduce legislation to basically have $50 million go towards grassroots initiatives, grassroots programs, people-to-people diplomacy, so that their belief is you have to start from the ground up and build this people-to-people diplomacy and dialogue and understanding among people, starting with young people, but not necessarily limited to just young people, so that it can start at the grassroots level and build up rather than from the top down.
Now, you mentioned The Wall, which is a direct reference to their signature song, this group's signature song. Tell us about how that reflects their central message.
Well, Guy Geffen, who's one of the musicians in the band right now in the group, he talks about this song called The Wall, which to them is very symbolic, not only the physical wall that separates the West Bank with Israel, but also as psychological wall, as people who have to look at this physical wall, this partition that's between the two people. He says, what are children thinking when they see that wall? It's basically psychological. It's basically putting up prejudices. It's building on those prejudices and building this wall within yourselves, as well as physically separating you from other people. And that's wrong.
Now, who are the people that are part of this group, and what struck you about them? You got a chance to meet them and spend time with them.
Absolutely. They were so inspiring. Aaron Schneer, who's the founder and also a musician in the group, his whole idea was music has always been universally a language that everyone can relate to. It breaks down barriers. Universally, all over the world, we hear of initiatives where people of all creeds and colors and backgrounds and religions come together and play music, and all of a sudden all the politics of it just melt away. And their idea was to bring Jews and Arabs from literally both sides of the wall and help them understand one another and to play music together. And within the framework of creating harmony in music, understanding each other, that breeds peace and harmony and understanding and tolerance.
Now, what message do you hope is distributed among our viewers when they watch this piece?
You know, throughout history, of course, we've always had people. We've had spiritual leaders in our own history with Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. We've had poets. We've had musicians. I mean, John Lennon said, I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And he was right to believe that what Aaron Schneer and his group and his program are trying to get the message out there, that sometimes even in the media itself, there's so much emphasis on the minority of people who don't want peace, who don't understand tolerance. And he is using this as a way to amplify the voices of those who are the silent majority, the majority of people, he says. want peace, want tolerance, want peaceful resolution in the Middle East. And I truly believe that if this initiative can go through and they can get funding for it and the support from all over the world, not just in the Middle East area, and they see America as playing a leadership role in that, and they're hoping that that message will get through and that more people will come together who are silent right now, who will be given the voice, and through this group, they will have this voice to bring that message through their music of hope and tolerance and peace in the Middle East.
Always inspiring, isn't it, Imran, to see young people come together for something like that?
It's amazing.
Yeah, great story. Our thanks, as always, to VOA's Julie Tabo for that.
Now, staying on the subject of the Palestinian experience, a comedy by a Brooklyn filmmaker with Palestinian roots is on the film festival circuit now. It tells the story of love and culture clashes in New York City. VOA's Carolyn Weaver has more.
Why? We're going to see a girl. Who is she?
Peace After Marriage tells the story of Arafat, a lonely, sexually obsessed young man raised in Brooklyn by Palestinian immigrant parents who don't understand his American ways.
If I want to hit him, I will hit him.
Don't hit me, I'm 30 years old! خلاص يعني. Don't disrespect your father.
Writer-director Ghazi Al-Baloui, who also stars in the film, says some of the story is taken from his own life. Soon after he was born in a refugee camp in Jordan, his parents immigrated to the U.S.
Really all I've ever known is Brooklyn. The big culture shock for me really is kind of the reverse. It's not Brooklyn, it's when I go back home. And then you see that in the movie.
He's referring to a scene in which Arafat flees an arranged marriage back home on the West Bank, pursued by angry relatives of the jilted bride.
Ooh. Shalom.
Back in New York, desperate for female companionship, Arafat agrees to marry a young woman seeking a fake marriage to obtain permanent U.S. residency status. She's an Israeli.
Yani she's from Palestine?
We call it Palestine. She doesn't.
Al-Baloui says it's a prototypical New York as melting pot story, with no political message.
I always think of the film as a New York comedy. I think people bring in their perceptions and their baggage of the Palestinian conflict or the Israeli conflict. I mean, I was just writing about myself, so I just thought it was really funny taking my life here in Brooklyn and then using, an Israeli girl who would come to New York, because I think it's just to take the politics out, and that's what I'm always looking to do.
Maybe not always. At the film's premiere at the Abu Dhabi Film Festival, Al-Baloui joked that sexual jihad, or an orgy, might help bring peace to the Middle East, and was boycotted by the Arab press. His next film is set in New York in the year after the September 11th attacks, and is a comedy about a young Arab American named Osama who can't get a date.
It's kind of like a film postcard to that time for me, and it's also about kind of regaining hope.
Last fall, Peace After Marriage became the first Arab-directed film chosen to open the Jerusalem Film Festival. It will be commercially released in Turkey next summer. Carolyn Weaver, VOA News, New York.
Well, sadly, that is all we have for you today, but now it's time for your say.
Yes, and we want to hear back from you, so just drop by our Facebook page, VOA On Assignment. Tell us what you think about today's reports and what else you might like to see on the show.
And if you missed any of this week's program, you can watch all the segments at voanews.com and YouTube. You can even get full English captions on YouTube by clicking on the CC button in the player window.
We're back again next week with more of the stories behind the headlines. Catch you then.